I call this fly the EP Clouser Minnow. And why would you want to tie a Clouser Minnow with EP fibers instead of bucktail? My answer is because I wanted to try it out and see if it would work. Turns out, works great. I've got some footage later in the video where you can see me catching some saltwater fish with this very fly. So I'm using a size 4 stainless steel Umpqua saltwater hook, and then I'm going to tie on some small Chartreuse dumbbell eyes. These are just lead painted dumbbell eyes. And you know, the cool thing about tying these flies yourself, you can use different size dumbbell eyes, which will give it more or less weight. And so like if you're trying to not sink too quick, you could go extra small. If you're trying to sink a lot faster and a lot more, you could use some large or extra large. It'd be harder to cast that way, but you could do it. Then we're going to go with some polar bear EP fibers. It's just kind of a white color. I don't usually work a lot with EP fibers. I like natural materials more, but after seeing all the different things that EP fibers can do, I've kind of really tried making a lot of new flies, or I guess a lot of the flies that I tie with natural materials with EP fiber, and just trying to see what works best. So I'm going to then take, after I've quartered the EP fibers, I'm going to take some Krystal Flash. I think you can use any color Krystal Flash for this. I'm using Bonefish Tan Krystal Flash, and I'm going to just try to mingle a couple of those strands of the Krystal Flash into the fibers to give it a little bit of extra sparkle. And I'm not sure if that really does that much. I'm sure the fly would be fine without it, because it's kind of hard to see with the time lapse moving so fast, but if you really look at those EP fibers underwater, they shimmer already. Putting the Krystal Flash in there is just a little bonus. So then what I'm going to do is cut 4 more strands of Krystal Flash in half. So instead of quartering it, this time I've got halves. I'm going to tie it in at the backmost area of the fly just before the poof the tail starts. And the reason I'm going to do that is so that I can walk it up the shank of the hook to give just a shiny tan color glimmer for the body of the fly. We're going to be putting more material on top of the dumbbell eyes to complete the Clouser pattern, but I've always felt that adding just kind of a shiny shank to my Clouser minnows, I do this with bucktail and I do it with EP fiber. I think it adds personality and makes it look nice and flashy. So I'm going to use some thin resin to coat it to make it even flashier and also more durable. That way it sticks together really well and it just looks so good once it's in the water. Hit it with the UV light and you have just like one last step, which is going to be to add in the next section of the EP fibers, which is in a color called bait fish. And I love the way this stuff looks. It actually changes color a little bit in the water where it looks a little bit darker. I'm going to quarter this and then make sure that you're not using too much. You're going to have to tie like 5 to 10 of these before you figure out exactly how much of the material you want. I found that even if you use too much material, the fish still like it. It just looks like a fatter little bait fish. So it's okay if it's too big. You can also come in after the fact and kind of trim it up with your scissors. But I've done the same thing with the top side as I've done with the bottom, where I've put in a couple of strands of the Krystal Flash, and then you tie it in front of the dumbbell eyes, so between the eye of the hook and where the dumbbell eyes are. And if you're kind of new to fly tying, Clouser minnows are going to be one of the first flies you tie. And what you learn really quickly is that you want to leave enough space between the eye of the hook and where you're going to put your dumbbell eyes so that you can tie a knot into the fly and secure all that material down, because there's nothing worse than when you get out on the water and it pulls out because you weren't able to effectively tie a knot in. Stay tuned to the end of the video to see me catch a couple of ladyfish here in Orange Beach, Alabama. So same fly, and I'm using some floating line with an 8-weight rod. It's a TFO rod. It is a perfect day, no wind, and it's pretty calm. It's low tide was started around, I think, 3 p.m., and I was able to find a sandbar where I was casting kind of back towards the beach. And these ladyfish are awesome. I'd caught a couple of them before in Texas, in Port Aransas, but they were all over the place this day and loved this Clouser Minnow. However, they kept breaking off. So I think I lost like 5 or 6. I was able to get a lot of them like to me, and then as soon as I was able to get the fish in hand, it would actually break the hook off, and then I just have to start over again. But that time it got off. I think at the end of the video I've got one where I actually get it all the way in hand. But this next clip was by far my favorite connect, where I'm super close to the beach. I mean, I'm using a GoPro, so the wide angle lens doesn't really do a good job of explaining how close I am. I might be 15 to 20 feet in the surf, maybe less. And then I hook into a ladyfish, the biggest one of the trip, and it does this awesome like barrel roll jump, which breaks my line, which had been frayed a little bit from catching a couple of other smaller species, I think. And I mean, I am right there. People that were on the beach watching couldn't believe it. That fish might have been, I don't know, maybe 3.5 feet long. I just didn't think that they would be that close to the beach, but really they are. It really surprised me how many fish I was able to hook into where I was just like waist deep. And that just goes to show that I don't know anything about saltwater fly fishing. I had zero expectations coming in on this trip, but I had a lot of fun getting to hook into stuff with flies that I've tied, and that's a first for me coming out to Orange Beach and actually getting to use some of my own flies. So what do you think? Hopefully this video was good enough to deserve a subscription and a like. I'd love to know how I could make them better. Please let me know in the comments.
Lost another fly.